Welcome back to my little channel. Today I'm going to respond once again to Marina's shutup. She really should have listened to her own advice. Anyway, today's video will be about her berating white people not understanding some of MLK's quotes. I'm curious whether she knew what MLK stood for though. But that's beside the point, and we will probably address that somewhere along the video. Anyway, for your viewing entertainment.
You know, I might be daft and all, but what's an MLK?
Ah yes, we are so used to using MLK that we assume everyone knows what we mean. But MLK stands for Martin Luther King Jr. He was, basically a civil rights activist and a Christian minister who basically fought for the integration of black people into white society. And in a lot of things, this man was a brilliant man. But as often with revolutionaries, they get misunderstood as soon as they die. Unfortunately, he got killed for his activism, but he did do a lot of good in the community, both black and white. Unfortunately, roughly at the same time, we also had the Black Panthers and stuff like that. And they didn't do as much good. And they were also for black power. Well, actually, Martin Luther King wasn't for black power. He was for black integration.
Oh, aye, wait, I heard about him. Wasn't he the one that dreamt a lot or something?
Yeah, more or less. He was famous for one of his speeches, which was indeed the I have a dream, where people are no longer judged by the color of their skin, but the content of the character thingy. So, yeah. But yeah, no, it was a great speech, and it's something that egalitarians all over the world look admiring towards. Anyway, onward to Marina.
Hey, so today is Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and I am getting a little bit frustrated with all of the posts I'm seeing from people who have kind of misquoted Martin Luther King and co-opted his arguments in order to argue against racial justice in 2016, 2017.
Yeah, I'm a little bit late to the bandwagon, I know. Martin Luther King Day has been gone already. But yeah, there is no such thing as racial justice. There is justice. I mean, as soon as you start making it racial, you already didn't understand what MLK was all about.
Wait, this is that dream thing we were talking about, right? That he wanted people to be judged on their character, not their skin color, right? That's the one.
Indeed, it is. And if you kind of say we shouldn't judge people on their skin color, then basically by then saying, well, it's about racial justice, you kind of miss the point, because then you're back to segregating where he was about getting rid of segregation.
And I feel like a lot of people cherry pick like his arguments in order to make a point that I don't think that he would have agreed with in the first place. I think a lot of people whitewash his quotes and make them less radical than they actually are, because, you know, he was really for radically restructuring like institutions in society. So I wanted to share some of his lesser known quotes, because I see a lot of his arguments being co-opted by white people who are anti-Black Lives Matter and, you know, anti any sort of, I guess, change that would help solve issues of racism. It always, like, comes with this kind of, I feel like it always comes with this type of fragility and this discomfort with any sort of like racial progress. I'm a little rambly right now, but I'm going to share some of his quotes.
Okay, Marina, I let you ramble on for a while, but yes, Martin Luther King would have nothing to do with Black Lives Matter. First off, Martin Luther King was ideology driven by non-violence. He did not stand for it. I mean, he didn't mind protesting, but shouting that we wanted dead cops, he wouldn't. He simply wouldn't. And MLK isn't only about the rights for black people, because they have those rights, but they're also about integration of homosexuality and transgenderism and all those fluffy things. Did you know what Martin Luther King said about those things?
Ooh, I could wager a guess. I mean, you say he was a minister, right? Religious and all that. He weren't in favour of it.
Well, yes. I mean, he is or was a Christian minister, and on average, he wasn't a big fan of homosexuality. He didn't dislike the person, but, well, as it always goes, don't hate the sinner, but hate the sin. And he did see it as a sin, so he wasn't in favor of homosexuality. But retroactively, people are trying to make it sound like, oh no, well, he would have been in favor. It's just because of the times. If he would have lived now, he would have been in favor of homosexuality. Well, I don't know, because he doesn't live now, but at that time, he simply was not. Just as most ministers still are not. So it's more likely that he wouldn't have been. But yeah, I mean, let's change the narrative. I mean, he must have been a good man, therefore he must have been in favor of homosexuality, right? Because we are in favor of it. Black Lives Matter is in favor of it. Therefore, Martin Luther King must have been. But he wasn't.
That I don't hear parroted as often by people who are condemning any type of like civil rights movements.
I'm sorry, my dear, but do you really think that Martin Luther King will be misquoted by people who are against the civil rights movements of the day? Or do you equate today's civil rights movement with the civil rights movement of those days? Because trust me, Black Lives Matter fits closer to the Black Panthers than to Martin Luther King.
This is the second time you mentioned the Black Panthers. What are they?
Well, when Martin Luther King was all about integration and acceptance and being one with each other, the Black Panthers were about segregation. Where Martin Luther King was about non-violence, the Black Panthers were pretty much about violence. I mean, they have committed several shootings, murders of police officers, and when they did crime, because they shot police officers. One of the more famous persons that shot a police officer is Ashara Shakur. She has been convicted, she fled to Cuba, and now seems to be the ideological mother of Black Lives Matter. So yeah, the Black Panthers were everything that Martin Luther King was not. They were all about violence and segregation. And the funny thing is, they actually more or less justified their action by saying, well, no one ever achieved anything by peaceful means. I guess they didn't know history very well, or at least never heard of Mahatma Gandhi, but that's just me.
So this quote is from Where Do We Go From Here, his book from 1967. It says, "Why is equality so assiduously avoided? Why does white America delude itself, and how does it rationalize the evil it retains? The majority of white Americans consider themselves sincerely committed to justice for the Negro. They believe that American society is essentially hospitable to fair play and to steady growth toward a middle-class utopia embodying racial harmony. But unfortunately, this is a fantasy of self-deception and comfortable vanity." Sorry, I'm just trying to find the quotes that stood out to me.
Maybe you should have done that before you started recording, or even record after you found what you wanted to say. But don't leave this little bit of you hanging around in, because it just looks silly. I mean, you didn't think this one through, did you?
Well, I mean, it's his opinion that he thinks that things weren't going perfectly well for the black man or black woman, in all fairness. But at the same time, he also recognized that a lot of people were thinking that they were doing the right thing. He might have been right, he might have been wrong. Either way, I mean, it's not an example of how things were really bad. It's more an assertion. There's no evidence given.
This is from The Other America in 1968. But it is not enough for me to stand before you tonight and condemn riots. It would be morally irresponsible for me to do that without, at the same time, condemning the contingent, intolerable conditions that exist in our society. These conditions are the things that cause individuals to feel that they have no other alternative to engage in violent rebellions to get attention. And I must say tonight that riot is the language of the unheard. And what it is, America has failed to hear. It has failed to hear that the promises of freedom and justice have not been met, and it has failed to hear that large segments of white society are more concerned about tranquility and the status quo than about justice and humanity.
Yeah, Wayne, didn't you say it was about, non-violent and all that? Sounds like he's in favour of violence in this one.
Well, yeah, he did say that, but it's a good example of quote mining, because in the very same speech he said this. Let me say, as I have always said, and I will always continue to say, that riots are socially destructive and self-defeating. I'm still convinced that non-violence is the most potent weapon available to oppressed people in their struggle for freedom and justice. I feel that violence will only create more social problems than they will solve. That in a real sense, it is impractical for the Negro to even think of mounting a violent revolution in the United States. So I will continue to condemn riots and continue to say to my brothers and sisters that this is not the way, and continue to affirm that there is another way. And he was right, because look at America now. There is more segregation than there was during Martin Luther King's start, not his death. And he had already reached a lot, but by more and more people taking up arms, so to speak, by shouting down people who are white and by telling people that it's okay to kill cops, we see a split in the movement, so to speak. It seems that the Black Panthers in this have been victorious, where MLK's movement has lost its traction, which is a bad thing, in all fairness.
This one is also from Where Do We Go From Here? Whites, it must frankly be said, are not putting in a similar mass effort to re-educate themselves out of their racial ignorance. It is an aspect of their sense of superiority that the white people of America believe that they have so little to learn. The reality of substantial investment to assist Negroes in the 20th century, adjusting to Negro neighbors, and genuine school integration is still a nightmare for all too many white Americans. These are the deepest causes for contemporary abrasions between the races. Loose and easy language about equality, resonant resolutions about brotherhood fall pleasantly on the ear, but for the Negro there is a credibility gap he cannot overlook. He remembers that with each modest advance, the white population promptly raises the argument that the Negro has come far enough. Each step forward accents an ever-present tendency to backlash.
Well, that sounds pretty condemning, doesn't it? I mean, no, I'm not even sure why it does, to be honest. I mean, what's he saying?
Well, I'm not 100% sure, but it boils down to me, or at least I understand it as this. White people haven't done enough yet, they should do more. In all fairness, I never was alive in 1967, so I can't really accurately comment on it at all. What I do know, though, is that it was 1967, so that's more than 40 years ago. That's more than 50 years ago. So, yeah, I'm sorry, what's your point? He could have been right, he could have been wrong. And why do I think he could have been wrong? Because he's a human and he wasn't a divine entity. Not everything he said is profound. After all, he also said this. Let me say, another thing that's more in the realm of the spirit, I guess. That is, that if we are to go on in the days ahead and make a true brotherhood a reality, it is necessary for us to realize more than ever before that the destinies of the Negro and the white man are tied together. Now, there are still a lot of people who don't realize this. The racists still don't realize this. But it is a fact now that Negroes and whites are tied together and we need each other.
Well, that doesn't sound bad then, does it? I mean, needing each other is a good thing. I mean, isn't that what a society does? Build on each other.
Yeah, well, the quote isn't quite finished yet. Martin Luther King did at times bring in identity politics as well. It's not completely new. Because the Negro needs the white man to save him from his fear. And the white man needs the Negro to save him from his guilt. We are tied together in so many ways. Our language, our music, our cultural patterns, our material prosperity, and even our food are an amalgamation of black and white. Yet still, he would say, white people need to be saved from their guilt and Negroes need to be saved from their fear. This is identity politics. Why would all black people live in fear? Why would all white people have guilt? This is one of the things that I don't agree with Martin Luther King. Then again, I didn't agree with him on his stance on homosexuality either, to be honest. So, yes, the man was a great man, but a divinity he is not. He was a great man.
Okay, and this is the last quote that I wanted to share, and it is from a letter that he wrote when he was in Birmingham jail in 1963. First, I must confess that over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's greatest stumbling block in his stride towards freedom is not the white citizens' counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace which is the absence of tension to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you and the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. So, yeah, I guess maybe just think about that a little bit.
Seriously, Marina? Whilst in jail, he got disillusioned? Stuff that he said was because he got disillusioned. I'm not saying he was completely right or wrong. I'm saying his emotions for being in jail could have something to do with it. Stuff that he said then, he later, well, he didn't retract it, but he basically didn't mention it ever again. Don't you recognize what you're doing? Yes, he had a hard time. Hell, he was a civil rights activist in a period of time that people actually stood against him. People are not now standing against the things he stood for back then, by the way, but never mind that. He actually went to prison for it. So of course he felt disillusioned. He'd hoped more white people would have his back. But they didn't, which is a problem. Which was a problem. Not is, was. I can see this in the time and the context of when it happened. Why can't you?
Oh, I've never been to jail in my life, but I can imagine if you're locked up somewhere and you're expecting some mates to come and help you out, they don't. That'll pretty piss you off, I guess. It would me.
If you're someone who likes to spout Martin Luther King Jr. quotes in an attempt to silence any sort of protest from people of color, I think a firm understanding of what MLK was actually saying is necessary in order to understand what's happening today. And I guess I'm just tired of seeing that kind of stuff co-opted. So yeah, happy MLK Day. Bye.
I'm sorry, Marina, shut up. Are you really this disingenuous? Are you really going to say, well, you can't use Martin Luther King's quotes because he also said some bad stuff? Bad stuff that he actually said in difficult times. You're quote mining and you're doing a terrible job at it. Yes, when he was in prison, he spoke out against the people he thought were his allies because he hadn't felt their alignment. He hadn't felt that they were in support of him. Yes, he spoke out that riots were something that could be understood. At the same time, though, he spoke out against the riots. Hell, in the very same speech that you quote mined that little piece from, he said, we should never do this. When people like me quote Martin Luther King, it's because of the good things he said. When people like you quote Martin Luther King, it's to prove that he wasn't a saint. I didn't think he was a saint, though. I know he's a man. But you are trying to make him a saint now. You're trying to say, well, you don't understand what he said, because he also said this. Long weekends, Hitler. Not in favor of Hitler, but hey, favor long weekends, though. Mahatma Gandhi had a terrible habit of mistreating the people around him. But he was a great man nonetheless. People aren't perfect. We're not saints, we're people. Martin Luther King wasn't perfect, but he was a good person. Why can't you see people as a whole? Why do you quote mine the little bits you want and ignore the little bits you don't want? There is something really disingenuous with you. But then again, I guess this fits the political identity bullshit that people keep pushing. The narratives that we need to hear. Oh, no. Martin Luther King wasn't in favor of white people. He was in favor of equality, but not for white people. Fuck you. Marina, shut up. Seriously. Fuck you. Out of all the bullshit I've seen you peddle, this must be the worst. Go back to school. Anyway, this is the end of my little rant. I hope you liked it. Like, share, subscribe if you feel so inclined. And I hope to see you all soon. Be good.